it's the current owners of SFP or whether it's Cardi Construction Limited. Obviously the issue is that the current owners of SFP do not accept that they are in default and have put forward a series of reasons, some of which are set out in the paper, as to why they think that that's not the case. I'm not going to comment on the validity of those. Obviously we've got legal advice on that subject. But you're quite right, if Cardi's took the matter forward and they tried to build out using the existing development agreement, that legal situation between the council and the company would still exist, would have to be explored. But as we discovered through the process before, there is nothing in the agreement which allows the council to take the site back because SFP haven't done what they said they were going to do at this stage. What we had to do, and what we've in fact done, is served a breach notice, which is part of a process. That process will take a considerable amount of time. It will take longer because of matters which have come forward during the mediation discussions with SFP, some of which again are set out in the paper, the reasons why they say they're not in default, in other words. And there is no guarantee that at the end of that process the council would succeed. In the meantime, they have put a proposal to the council involving Cardi Construction Limited, which we are duty bound to explore. So we're exploring it. And that is the reasonable position of the council. That's what we understand we have to do by virtue of the agreement. We can argue about whether the agreement was fit for purpose. You and I might agree on that, but we are stuck with the agreement as it stands. You said, I think, that if Cardi's took over and about due diligence, clearly there would be no due diligence. There's nothing the council could do if Cardi's bought the existing agreement and implemented it. There wouldn't be a process of due diligence for the council to enter into because the council wouldn't have any say in the subject. Or indeed, if SFP was sold to any other company, they'd be able to build out according to the existing development agreement, if indeed they could. In terms of what the site is worth, yes, it may well be worth more, it may well be worth a different amount. I think we've committed to exploring that as part of the fact that we have to get best consideration. So we're not going into this process saying whatever was in the existing contract is the price, is the money that the council's going to get. We say we're entering into a proper valuation process. We're not allowed, in fact, to go to market and invite someone else to come and talk to us about it because we're in an agreement with SFP. And much as we might wish we weren't in an agreement with SFP, they are our development partners. We can't pretend they're not. And indeed, I would suggest if we were to go and advertise this and talk to somebody else, it would be wonderful for SFP because it would be exactly what they would like to take to court to show that the council doesn't want them to develop the site, has in fact set out to frustrate them from developing the site, and actually wants to do a deal which gets a better solution with somebody else. So that, in my opinion, would be a very stupid thing for the council to do.
Over a decade and nothing.
I think I've answered most of the questions.
No, I don't think so. Not at all.
Oh, well, as to whether what might come forward and what different might come forward, I'm afraid it's the same answer. Until such time as that agreement was set aside, the council isn't in a position to look at other things. And that agreement is still in place. And in all probability, the only way it could be set aside is through an agreement between the parties or through a court case.
What about the breaches?
Can I just ask members of the public not to participate in the debate? Thank you. Councillor Baker, did you want to come back? No, I'll go to Councillor Dry.
Yeah, I mean, I've still got this issue about, you know, if Cardis are in default, you know, if there's been a breach, then that's sort of de facto. So surely at that point, even if they got taken, SFP are in default, if Cardis took them over at the instant, they're still in default.
Absolutely.
I don't understand why that doesn't create a break for the council to be able to look elsewhere. But the other thing is the due diligence thing. The only reason I raised that is that at point 7 in the questions and answers, it said what due diligence will be undertaken to ensure Cardi construct. And it says in there, oh, it'll be rigorous and strict, you know, and now you say, well, we don't bother. Well, kind of did.
Yes, you did.
if
Yes,
I can
Councillor.
come back, I mean, what allows the council to do due diligence on Cardi's is entering into a new agreement. So Cardi's, the proposal is that Cardi's buy SFP. Cardi's, to my understanding, and I may be proven wrong about this, but Cardi's are not proposing to implement the existing agreement. What they're saying is, we'll buy SFP if you come to a deal with us. And that is an alternative to a lengthy and expensive and potentially unsuccessful court battle entered into by this council at cost to the residents. Now, you know, that is a choice that the council could make, but obviously it would do so taking into account its chances of winning that and what the effect of that would be on Ramsgate over the period that it went on. So the due diligence comes into play because it is proposed there'll be a new agreement. If there's a new agreement, there will be a process of due diligence. Yeah.
Councillor Driver.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'm a bit astonished that we haven't got the legal agreement and the legal advice from Vincent Masons in front of us tonight. It's incredible that we're here as an overview and scrutiny panel to look at giving recommendations to the Cabinet, yet the key document and the key information that's been withheld from us is the legal advice from Vincent Masons that Councillor Everett is so eloquently quoting. Because I feel that this panel can't do its job without seeing that advice, seeing what the Cabinet's been told, seeing what the officers have been told, and also meeting with the authors of that advice and asking them questions face to face. What's happening here is a travesty. We're on a time frame of 16th of October. I'll be moving some recommendations later on about this, but I certainly believe this is such an important issue for the people of Ramsgate, who have had to put up with a derelict site for 12 years. Okay. It's such an important issue for this council because of a lot of issues tied up with that site and the regeneration of Ramsgate, that for the sake of a few extra weeks of delay, this committee should have the legal advice, it should have the valuation advice that's been talked about, and it should be able to meet here and question the authors of that advice, and it should also be able to question the valuers as well. And then when we've done that, we might be able to make some significant recommendations rather than being used, as I feel we're being used now, as a rubber stamping shop.
Well, I'd like to answer that. Thank you, Councillor Driver. If I can give you some assurance, both myself and the Deputy Chairman had, at my personal request, access to the legal advice on behalf of the panel. I was very keen, because it is a matter of huge public interest, I was very keen that the public weren't excluded from the meeting tonight, and I'm very keen that the public don't have to be excluded, that we don't have to go into closed session. Once we start talking in detail about legal advice, it then becomes very difficult, given that we are currently in a legal situation with SFP, that we cannot discuss that in open session. It's very difficult to balance transparency, which we all want to do, I believe, you as much as anybody else, so that the public can really get a flavour of the issues, but without having to go into the level of detail that will require us to go into closed session. So I mean, that I hope gives you a little reassurance, but clearly not.
Can I just come back on that? I mean, quite obviously, it goes without saying that if we were going to be discussing confidential legal advice about a transaction that the council is in, that would be in closed session. I'm not saying it shouldn't be. And I'm also saying as well, with respect to yourself, all members of this panel are entitled to see that legal advice. It's in the Constitution that we can see any advice and documents in the hands of officers and or the Cabinet, so we can constitutionally see that as a committee, as a panel, and I think we should be asking to see that, even if it means having a separate meeting which will probably be closed to the public, where I can't bring my camera along and of course wouldn't, where we could talk in great detail about the legal advice. Because I don't want to accept and vote and make recommendations by proxy. I want to see the advice myself. That's what I was elected to do. That's why I'm on this committee. So I'm just suggesting, and I will move a motion later on, that that is indeed what we do, and also as well in terms of the valuation.
Thank you, Councillor Driver. I mean, that's quite reasonable. What I proposed was that we start effectively looking at the general issues in public session, and you know, you're perfectly entitled, as you quite rightly say, or anybody in the panel, to request more detailed information that can't be shared with the public, and you know, if it's the panel's decision that we need to look at more and we need to have another meeting, so be it. You know, that is absolutely right. What I wanted to do was to make sure that we start in open session so that we can look at the general issues, and then we can go deeper if need to be. Thank you. Councillor Wells.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'll just go to the question and answer first. I had one or two comments to add to Councillor Baker's. And when this came before Cabinet in a slightly different form, I had some concern about the language and how it was used and the looseness of the language and whatever. I'm delighted that, you know, 2 weeks down the line we've rushed these questions and answers out this morning, so that everybody had lots of time to look at them. But, you know, I find the same sort of looseness of language across some of these questions that we had in the previous Cabinet report. And I also noticed, by the way, that one of the recommendations in the Cabinet was withdrawn on the evening of the 11th of September, and that still sits in the Cabinet report. That hasn't been removed tonight either, which is quite interesting. Recommendation 2, you withdrew it because you said it was already in existence. Yeah. Okay. So let me just look at number 1. For example, we talked there about the default notice being served or whatever, and there seems to be a word missing from the final sentence, because I believe this is a potential company buyout. It hasn't actually happened. It has been talked about. It's not in existence. But the last sentence talks about it as if it is actually here now and happening, and I'm not sure that's accurate. The other question too, I think we have a phrase there called outstanding money. There's no outstanding money because the thing hasn't been built. The money that comes is conditional on the flats being built, the overage being paid. You were very careful, Councillor Everett, to tell us last time that, you know, that when the freehold went the freehold way, it might have got the money from it, but the freehold is gone. But those monies aren't outstanding until it's actually there. And sadly, I have to go back to a little spat I had with Mrs. Crowley last time we met. Best consideration. I went out of my way to look up what this actually means. And of course, best consideration doesn't mean maximum financial value. Best consideration does include social, economic regeneration and other benefits as part of the valuation that is in place. That is in all the relevant definitions you would find. So again, I find the way that's used, if not dishonest, a little odd. Question 3. Yes, of course, we don't want to see SF Ventures limited there or there, but I think for most people the issue goes wider than that. What if part of this deal ends up with one of the SFP directors sitting on the Cardi board of the construction company concerned? Would we be happy with that? And I don't know what our powers are in regard to that, but that's something I think that most people who really look at this issue would be really quite concerned about. 4 is true as far as it goes, but of course isn't true if we pursue the default notice. Because if you pursue the default notice and we win, we do have the opportunity to remarket it and take it elsewhere.
Yes. And
the halting of the pursuit of the default notice is something, again, I think that people don't understand. Question 5, the answer there sounds awfully like something I've heard before. Sounds like something I heard in about 2009 when we all were convinced that Cardi was coming to save the day.
2006.
For about 5 years. I think we'd be right to treat this with a little bit of cynicism, given the history of this particular project. Over the page there, perhaps a direct question here. Could somebody tell me, in financial loan and security terms, what the difference is between 199 years and a freehold? My understanding that the original leases are 199 years because that would enable people to raise finance and deal with it rather than actually having to have the freehold. Number 7, back to due diligence. Okay, right, reassuring. I'm glad Councillor Everett actually explained that to us, and those first 3 lines are fantastic. I'm slightly concerned about the ensuing 7 lines. Sounds awfully like a list that Councillor Poole along the way here read out some time ago to justify as to why SFP was going to be the best thing since sliced bread. And I do think as well that we need to have a little bit more concern about the maintenance of the cliff wall. Before this particular proposal came along, the leaseholder, who actually was on that site, was responsible for the maintenance of the cliff wall. And I wonder whether during the course of this negotiation, one of the aims should be to see where the responsibility for that maintenance of the cliff wall actually lies. Because let's be clear, under the current agreement, the overages will yield us something like £3 million if the valuation doesn't change. Based on the last time we had to do repairs, that's 3 lots of repairs. The last lot of repairs we did, I think, in 2008, 2009, between 900,000 and £1 million. Are we really saying that we're going to maintain for 199 years the maintenance of the cliff face on something that actually ought to be done at current prices 3 times? And I rather think that probably we need to do something once every 10 or 20 years.
More or more.
Councillor Everett.
Well, I'm not sure how many questions there were there, but most of them were statements, I think. But, Councillor Wells, the reason that Proposition 2 is still in the paper is because the Cabinet paper has been produced to the Scrutiny Committee. It's not a new paper, it's the paper that went to Cabinet, which has been circulated for scrutiny. So obviously it has the same contents. I don't think that's very surprising. As it happens, the second recommendation wasn't adopted. Just in terms of the cliff wall, I think there are 2 issues there, and you're confusing them slightly. One is responsibility for the cliff wall, and the other is who pays for it. And I don't think they're the same thing. And I'm not at all sure that I'd be happy with Thanet District Council passing responsibility for the cliff wall to a developer, because the cliff, as we know, supports the promenade, and it's a significant feature of Thanet. I think it's appropriate that the council has responsibility, but I might well agree with you that in the negotiations there could be a discussion about what obligation the developer might enter into towards the cost of any repairs. And I hope you can see the distinction. The only other thing that I'd say to you is, you talk about item 5, I think it is, where it says that Cardi's would complete within 2 years with a long stop date of 3 years. Well, the difference is there's a long stop date. Now, I wasn't here in 2006 and 2009. I don't know whether you were. I think you probably were. I don't know whether you supported that contract. But it's a pity you didn't think of that at the time. Because if you thought of that at the time, we wouldn't be in this mess now.
Councillor Saunders.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm pleased to see that the question and answers covers most of the points that I was going to raise this evening, and I'm equally pleased to see, Chairman, that the due diligence will be vigorous. What I'm concerned about is the fact that within the questions and answers it says that a new company will be formed and renamed, and therefore I'm suggesting that we are not dealing with Cardi Construction Limited of Maynard Road, Wincheap. We're dealing with a brand new company, and yes, I have concerns that that company board could be made up with representatives from SFP Ventures, but my concern is I hope the due diligence takes place on the new company, not on Cardi Construction Limited, and that due diligence incorporates all of the necessary accreditations that are currently held by Cardi Construction Limited, and not wavered in favour of the track history of Cardi, which I accept is quite impressive. Thank you.
Councillor David.
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. Yeah, Councillor Everett mentioned about the lack of a long stop agreement. I can't comment on the 2009 agreement. I can comment on the 2006 agreement because I was the member probably most closely associated with that. I'm no expert in doing development agreements, so I actually believe that because we employed Freshwaters, who are one of the biggest lawyers, and most respected lawyers in the world, that they would think of those things for us. Now, if you're telling me that the lack of a long stop date is putting this council in a position where it's prejudiced, then I might suggest that it would be appropriate for us to look to take action against Freshwaters. Because if there was no long stop agreement in that 2006 agreement, that was down to them.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. I think it was Evershed.
Well, it was Evershed, they're just as big. Sorry
just
about
as,
that.
and just as bad, apparently, yeah.
just to sort of shed some light on that, obviously, OU and Scrutiny did ask Eversheds as to an explanation as to why there was no non-stop agreement, and they responded in the fact that there was not one asked for.
They should have advised.
Yes, can I just ask a very sort of straightforward question, which is that the rationale, it would seem, for supporting the New Deal with Cardiff, as it were, is that it enables the council to sort of get out of complicated legal problems, and yet we're not committed to doing a new deal with a company without doing due diligence. I think Councillor Bayford touched on it. I can easily foresee a situation whereby we're not quite out of the legal side of the current agreement, and we're not quite happy with the due diligence on a potential new agreement. And it seems to me that leaves us a lot more exposed than we are at present. Would you like to comment?
Well, only insofar as, you know, we will only enter into a new agreement if we're happy with the new agreement.
No new agreement.
I mean, and the due diligence is satisfactory to us. I mean, the new agreement has to stand up in its own right. It has to be satisfactory to the council in its own right, regardless of any other issues. If it isn't, then we won't enter into it.
Can I just come back on that for clarity? Because am I not right in understanding that Cardiff won't enter into an agreement with SFP until we have done the new agreement with, you know, that their condition for taking over the project is that the council agrees to whatever they want in the form of a new project. So how can you separate the two?
I don't think it is a problem in the way that you're suggesting it's a problem. I think the processes have to run to some extent in parallel. I can't speak for Cardi, but my understanding is Cardi will not acquire SFP unless there is a new agreement in place. If there's not a new agreement which we're happy to agree to, they won't acquire SFP and we'll be where we are now.
Perhaps I could just clarify. The position is that we, you know, arguably we could remain, we could follow the legal route in respect of the default notice that we have issued, which has started the process. We could follow through on that process. That is an option, but that would take years.
That's fine.
In our view, in order to do that.
That's fine.
So the view is being put forward that actually, rather than just follow that process, take the opportunity, which we are required to be reasonable within this agreement. That's why there's a mediation process in place, because there is an expectation that these issues you try to resolve these issues. You don't automatically just go to litigation. That's why these clauses are put in these contracts in the first place. So we are duty bound to undertake this conversation and get into this discussion. So that's what we've done, and one of the solutions as a result of that is to look at the possibility of a new agreement. Now, this council will not enter into a new agreement unless it's satisfied that the party with which we would be getting into that new agreement with is an appropriate and creditable company, i.e. the necessity to undertake due diligence. The agreement that we would be undertaking or looking at would be subject to, so it's in our interest as a council, subject to actually Cardi's taking over SPF. Otherwise we would not be entering into that agreement. So it's that way round and not the way round that it sounds that it's being posed, with all due respect, Chairman, unless I've misunderstood you. I hope that clarifies the position that we think we're in.
Someone speak.
Thank you. Just one more, I'll come back on that. I think what I'm saying is that if we are going down a specific route and not following other routes at the same time, because we're assuming that this route is going to be successful, dare I say, Thanet has a track record of disappointment, and I would, you know, I can't quite see in any of the paperwork that we've had so far a suggestion that that we have a plan B that is running parallel to plan A, if you like. So it puts us fundamentally in a weak position, because actually, if the due diligence doesn't turn out to be satisfactory, you know, where does that leave the council? I think we're in a weaker position if we haven't, you know, possibly continued to think what we should do if that isn't the case. So I just wonder if you'd like to comment on that.
I think that's an absolutely valid observation, and I think what we would be saying is, as far as we're concerned, we do have plan B, and that plan B is to continue with the process that's included within the current agreement, because that's why in fact we have served that notice. So we are leaving those options open to the council. We have not shut those options off at this stage. Sorry that we haven't made that clear.
Thank you. I think Councillor Driver asked to speak, and then Councillor Baker.
Yeah, just an observation, Chair. Reading the report and the other documentation that's been put around, again gets back to my original question about the legal advice. It may take years to complete the process that we began to take, but it's going to be a decision of members if it takes years or not, whether we go down it, not officers. We decide, and it's our view, and we make the decisions. You know, that should be quite clear that it's not going to be officer driven. Members decide if legal action is going to be taken. So we need to have that clear. And also as well, this is another reason why we need the legal advice. How do I know it's going to take years? Just because the chief executive told me doesn't mean it's true. I want to see the legal advice myself. And we are the ones at the end of the day where the buck stops. We need the information in front of us, and we need to be able to take cognizance of that information to make an informed decision. We don't want to make decisions on second-hand hearsay, which may or may not be true. We need to see the original documents. We are the Scrutiny Committee. It's our job to scrutinise, and that means looking at the documents which are available.
Thank you. Would you like to respond?
Could I just make it quite clear? I'm sure I probably don't need to, but I think we all fully understand that this is a member's decision. That's why